What if everything you thought you knew about your family turned out to be a lie? Imagine your entire life flipped upside down in an instant, and the truth you thought you knew was nothing but a cover-up. This story will shock you, inspire you, and show you the unbreakable power of love, truth, and forgiveness. Stay with us to the end, because you won't believe how this journey unfolds. If you want more stories like this that challenge everything you thought was possible, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications now. This is one you don't want to miss. It was just past midnight when Officer Ethan Cole turned down the same street he'd driven 100 times before. It was one of those nights where the city felt even quieter than usual, the kind of silence that makes small sounds echo. The south end of town wasn't known for anything good, just boarded-up storefronts, cracked sidewalks, and more stories than hope. The kind of place where people tried to forget things. But that night, something wouldn't be forgotten. The wind had picked up, sharp and cold, carrying with it the smell of old rain and trash. Ethan slowed as he passed the back of an abandoned warehouse. It was instinct more than anything. Something about the way the bags rustled, like something small was moving. At first, he figured it was just a stray cat digging around for scraps. But then he heard it. Not a meow. Not the wind. A cry. High-pitched. Fragile. Human. He pulled over without thinking and stepped out of the cruiser. The air cut through his uniform as he followed the sound into the narrow alley behind the building. Each step closer made the noise more distinct, more desperate. He scanned the shadows, the scattered garbage, the torn boxes, until his flashlight caught something tucked deep in the corner of a dented dumpster. There, wrapped in what looked like an old, stained t-shirt, was a baby. A newborn. His tiny chest moved so faintly, it almost didn't seem real. His skin was dusky, and the umbilical cord was still attached, a shocking detail that told Ethan just how fresh this life was. The baby was barely breathing. Ethan didn't think. His hands moved faster than his mind. He peeled off his jacket, wrapped it tightly around the baby's body, shielding him from the cold. He radioed for backup, but he didn't wait. He held the child close to his chest, ran back to the cruiser, and drove straight toward the nearest hospital. The baby was rushed into care as soon as they arrived. The doctors and nurses worked quickly. Ethan stood outside the room, still in uniform, still holding his breath, as if any moment now someone might step in and claim the child, explain everything, say it was all a mistake. But no one came. In the days that followed, no reports of a missing baby surfaced. No one called. No family showed up. It was like the baby had been erased before he ever really began. But Ethan couldn't let it go. He'd seen a lot on the job, more than most could handle. But this? A newborn left in a dumpster in the middle of the night, like garbage? It hit something deep. Something personal. They gave the baby a name at the hospital. Jaden. And when no one came forward to claim him, Ethan and his wife Maria, who had quietly carried the heartbreak of infertility for years, stepped forward. At first, it was just to foster. But from the very beginning, Jaden felt like theirs. What started as a late-night call turned into the beginning of something no one saw coming. Ethan didn't just save a life that night. He found someone who would change his own life forever. When Ethan and Maria Cole first brought Jaden home from the hospital, the house felt different. Not just quieter or calmer, but fuller, like a space that had always been waiting to be filled finally found its purpose. They hadn't planned for this. No one ever really does. But the moment Jaden was placed in Maria's arms, something shifted. 4 years, they'd tried to have a child of their own. They did everything. Appointments, tests, hopeful plans that always seemed to end in disappointment. The silence in their home used to feel heavy, like a reminder of everything they couldn't have. But now, with Jaden sleeping softly in a borrowed bassinet in their room, it was the kind of quiet that felt right, peaceful, like a new beginning. At first, the arrangement was temporary. They were his foster parents, giving him a place to be loved and safe while the system did what it had to do. Social workers came and went, paperwork piled up, and there were always questions about what might happen next. Would someone step forward? Would extended family be found? Could he stay? Ethan and Maria never pushed too hard at first, never said out loud how much they already loved him. But in their quiet moments, like when Maria would hum softly as she rocked him at night, or when Ethan would talk to him about baseball stats while changing his diaper, it was clear that Jaden had already become their son in every way that mattered. The legal process wasn't easy. Nothing with adoption ever is. There were hearings, background checks, interviews, and long waits filled with uncertainty. But Ethan and Maria stayed patient, even when the weight of not knowing started to wear them down. They had already committed in their hearts. They just needed the law to catch up. 1 year later, after what felt like a lifetime of back and forths, they got the call they had been hoping for. Jaden was officially theirs. And though he was too young to understand what it meant, his smile that day felt like a celebration of something even he could sense. He belonged. From that point on, the Coles were just a regular family trying to figure things out day by day. Of course, there were challenges. Being a transracial adoptive family in a small city came with its share of awkward questions and long stares. Some people meant well but didn't know how to phrase things. Others weren't so subtle. But Ethan and Maria made a promise to raise Jaden with honesty, to help him understand his story, his roots, and his worth. They kept open conversations at the center of their parenting, even from a young age. Jaden always knew he was adopted. He always knew he was found. But more importantly, he always knew he was loved, not as a replacement for a child they couldn't have, but as the child they were meant to raise. Their house changed as Jaden grew. Finger paintings filled the fridge, superhero capes hung on chairs, and bedtime stories became sacred rituals. He developed a love for puzzles and space documentaries, often falling asleep with books scattered around his bed. He asked 1,000 questions a day, most of them big, thoughtful ones that made Ethan and Maria laugh and wonder how they ended up raising a kid so curious. He didn't see color the way adults did, not at first. To him, his parents were just mom and dad. They were the ones who made pancakes on Sundays, built blanket forts during thunderstorms, and stayed up through every fever and nightmare. But as he got older, Jaden began to notice the differences. The questions from strangers, the looks at the grocery store, the awkward pauses when people tried to understand how their family fit together. Ethan and Maria never pretended those things didn't exist. They leaned into the hard conversations, helped Jaden build confidence in his identity, and reminded him that love didn't need matching skin to be real. They created a home filled with honesty, respect, and endless encouragement. Through it all, they were just trying to do what any parents hope to do: raise a good person. Someone strong, kind, and ready to face the world. And every time Jaden laughed at one of Ethan's terrible dad jokes or helped Maria bake banana bread, they knew they were doing something right. The family they built didn't come together the way they expected, but it came together exactly the way it was meant to. 17 years went by faster than Ethan and Maria Cole could have imagined. 1 minute, they were rocking Jaden to sleep in a room painted soft blue, and the next, they were standing in the kitchen watching him pour his own coffee, tall and thoughtful, with those same curious eyes that never stopped asking questions. From the beginning, Jaden was different in the best kind of way. He didn't just want to know how things worked, he wanted to know why. Why people did the things they did. Why stars formed the way they did. Why pain sometimes led to beauty. Growing up, Jaden had the kind of imagination that filled every room. He could turn a cardboard box into a spaceship and convince you to fly with him. He devoured science shows and documentaries, often pausing them to ask questions that most adults would have to Google. It didn't take long before he declared he wanted to be a forensic pathologist. Not because it sounded cool, but because he wanted to speak for people who couldn't speak for themselves. Ethan and Maria never pushed him in any direction. They just listened, encouraged, and tried their best to keep up with his endless hunger for knowledge. The Cole family was far from perfect, but they were real. They had messy dinners, lost library books, late-night homework sessions, and the kind of laughter that made your stomach hurt. They also had hard moments, times when Jaden would come home quiet after school, after someone made a comment that didn't sit right. Times when strangers would ask where his real parents were, or why he didn't look like them. Those moments never got easier, but they always became opportunities. Ethan and Maria taught Jaden how to answer those questions with grace and pride, how to hold his story like a shield, not a secret. Jaden understood early on that he was different. His skin was a deeper brown than his parents'. His curls didn't match Maria's straight hair or Ethan's buzz cut. And sometimes, when they were out together, people would stare a second too long, their faces a mix of curiosity and confusion. But Ethan and Maria never let those looks define their family. They raised Jaden to know that love had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with presence, with showing up, standing up, and never letting go. In school, Jaden did well, especially in science and English. Teachers loved him. Friends gravitated toward his humor and quiet confidence. He wasn't the loudest kid in the room, but when he spoke, people listened. Still, there were moments that tested him. When other kids would joke about adoption or say things they didn't realize were hurtful, Jaden would carry that weight home. Sometimes, he'd talk about it. Other times, he'd just sit on the porch and stare at the stars. Ethan would join him, not to fix things, but to be there. And that presence, that steady, calm, unquestioning presence, was often all Jaden needed to find his footing again. He had a strong sense of who he was, not just because his parents gave him answers, but because they gave him space to ask. They never told him how to feel about being adopted. They let him feel it all. The pride, the confusion, the gratitude, the sadness. He always knew the story of the night he was found, how Ethan had heard a cry behind an old warehouse and found a baby where no baby should have been. He didn't romanticize it, but he held it as something sacred, a strange kind of beginning that made him feel both chosen and lucky. Despite everything, Jaden was happy. He laughed easily. He asked impossible questions at the dinner table. He stayed up too late reading. He hugged his mom every morning before school and still high-fived his dad when they passed each other in the hallway. Their home was filled with traditions: Friday movie nights, birthday pancakes, and weekend trips to the science museum. It was a home built on love, truth, and the everyday kind of effort that makes families stick together. Those 17 years weren't perfect, but they were real, and they were theirs. For Ethan and Maria, watching Jaden grow into the person he was becoming felt like a gift they got to open every single day. And for Jaden, growing up in the Cole household meant knowing, without question, that he was loved, seen, and believed in. Always. It happened on a Thursday, one of those regular afternoons that gave no warning of what was coming. The Coles were at home, the kind of quiet evening that usually meant leftovers for dinner and everyone tucked into their own little routines. Jaden was at the table, headphones in, finishing up a school project. Maria was folding laundry on the couch, and Ethan had just stepped into the kitchen to pour himself a cup of coffee. That's when the knock came. Firm, deliberate, and completely unexpected. Ethan opened the front door to find two men in dark suits, both carrying serious expressions and crisp ID badges. They introduced themselves as FBI agents, and their tone made it clear this wasn't a courtesy visit. Ethan invited them in, still trying to make sense of why they were there. As they stepped inside, the air shifted. Everything that had felt normal just moments ago now felt tense and uncertain. The agents didn't waste time. They explained they were reinvestigating a cold case from 17 years earlier involving a missing newborn. It had gone unsolved for years, but new information had surfaced, and they believed the child might still be alive, possibly living under a different name. That's when they asked to speak to Jaden. Maria stood frozen at the threshold of the living room, holding a pair of socks she'd been folding just seconds earlier. Jaden looked up from his laptop, confused by the sight of strangers in suits staring at him like they already knew something he didn't. The agent said they needed a DNA sample, not because Jaden had done anything wrong, but to rule out a possible match. The air thickened. Ethan's heart pounded. He didn't understand how this could be happening. He'd told the story of the night he found Jaden dozens of times, to doctors, to social workers, even to journalists. It had been documented, verified. But now, it felt like none of it mattered. The DNA swab was quick, just a soft brush of the inside of Jaden's cheek. But the moment didn't pass quickly. It lingered, heavy and strange, as if something sacred was being questioned. Jaden didn't say much, but Ethan could see it all on his face. The uncertainty, the fear, the confusion. It hurt in a way nothing ever had. 2 weeks passed. Long days, longer nights. No answers, just a waiting game filled with what-ifs. Then, the results came. They matched. Jaden's DNA was linked to a woman named Alicia Monroe, who had died giving birth 17 years earlier in a private home clinic in Alabama. That clinic had since been shut down for malpractice. its records a mess of incomplete files and sealed reports. Alicia had been listed as a missing person shortly after her death, and her baby was presumed to have disappeared under suspicious circumstances. The case had gone cold, until now. But it didn't stop there. The FBI returned, this time with a warrant. They didn't knock politely. They came to arrest Ethan. Right there, in front of Maria and Jaden. They charged him with interference in a federal investigation and possible obstruction. There was even talk of illegal custody. Jaden stood on the lawn, helpless, watching his father be handcuffed and placed in the back of a black government vehicle. He called out, but there were no explanations that made sense. Maria stood on the porch, stunned, tears falling, unable to stop any of it. At the holding center, Ethan was interrogated for 9 hours straight. The agents showed him old footage, grainy security clips from a street camera near the clinic on the night Alicia died. It showed a man in a police uniform, someone whose height and build matched Ethan's. The timing lined up. The baby disappeared that same night. But Ethan kept telling them the same thing he'd said all those years ago. He found Jaden behind a warehouse, abandoned, barely alive. He hadn't been anywhere near Alabama. He didn't know anything about the clinic. But suspicion had already settled in, and it wouldn't be shaken easily. Back home, the house felt like it had been emptied of something essential. Jaden didn't sleep. He barely ate. His mind kept spinning through memories, questions, everything he thought he knew about his life. Was it possible his father, his hero, had taken him? Had built a life on a lie? He didn't believe it. He couldn't. But now the world was telling a different story, and it was up to him to find the truth. Jaden had always been someone who needed answers. He didn't like loose ends or unexplained things, not in books, not in life, and especially not now. After watching his father get taken away in handcuffs, something inside him shifted. The grief and shock didn't knock him down, they ignited something. He knew what he felt in his bones. Ethan Cole was not a kidnapper. The man who had raised him, cared for him, and stood by him for 17 years wasn't capable of stealing a child. But knowing it and proving it were two very different things. And Jaden was determined to find the truth. He started with what he had: old news articles, hospital records, adoption paperwork. He reached out to the local reporter who had covered his adoption years ago, asking for access to anything she might have archived. He went through his parents' filing cabinet, scanning documents late into the night. He combed through online public records, dug through forums, and requested surveillance footage from places he wasn't even sure had working cameras 17 years ago. He didn't sleep much. He didn't talk much. His world had shrunk to one mission: clear his dad's name. It was exhausting. The kind of mental and emotional fatigue that settled deep into his chest. Every lead either hit a wall or opened up more questions. There were nights when he sat alone in the living room, laptop glowing in the dark, wondering if maybe he'd never find what he needed. But giving up wasn't an option. This was his family. This was his life. He needed the truth not just for Ethan, but for himself. Eventually, he turned to someone he knew could help: Jonas Reed, a civil rights attorney who had worked with a classmate of his the year before. Jonas was smart, experienced, and most importantly, he listened. Jaden laid everything out for him: the footage the FBI had, the clinic records, the timeline. Jonas agreed to help off the record. He had contacts, legal knowledge, and access to tools Jaden didn't. Together, they worked through the data, trying to find anything that could prove Ethan's innocence. One night, while reviewing corrupted footage from a gas station near the old warehouse where Jaden had been found, something finally surfaced. It was glitchy, the image grainy, but there was movement. A figure, hooded, quick, clearly trying not to be seen, carrying something. The timestamp was 1 hour before Ethan's patrol car had arrived. Jaden's breath caught in his chest. He watched the figure walk to the dumpster, look around, and place a bundle inside. Then, just before walking away, the person turned, giving the camera a brief, partial glimpse of their face. It wasn't Ethan. The jawline was different. The eyes, the build, everything was off. Jonas enhanced the frame, ran it through some facial recognition tools, and eventually the pieces fell into place. The woman in the video was Renee Porter, Ethan's former partner, someone Jaden barely remembered but had heard stories about. She'd left the force the same year Jaden was adopted, said she'd moved out of state. But now, records showed she was living under a different name in Arkansas, working security at a warehouse. Jaden's hands shook as the truth settled in. Someone else had been there that night. Someone who had placed him in that dumpster. He didn't know why. Not yet. But now he had proof that his father hadn't lied. There was another version of this story, one no one had bothered to look for. And he was holding the first piece of it. Jonas made some calls, pulled some strings, and a week later, Renee was found and brought in for questioning. Jaden didn't go to the station. He didn't need to. He'd done what he came to do. He'd found the face behind the shadow, the one no one had thought to look for. And in doing so, he gave his father something far more powerful than just legal protection. He gave him back his truth. His name. His place in the story. And now, Jaden was one step closer to reclaiming his own. Renee Porter's arrest didn't make headlines right away. It started quietly, with a confession behind closed doors, just a few people in the room, and the kind of truth that rearranged everything. When the details finally came out, they unraveled the story Jaden had carried his entire life. Renee didn't deny it. She told the agents everything, how she'd been off duty that night, leaving a bar near the warehouse, when she spotted a woman stumbling through the alley, pale and bleeding, holding something close to her chest. That woman was Alicia Monroe, the same woman the FBI had linked to Jaden through DNA. Alicia collapsed before Renee could even ask her name. What she did remember was the woman whispering desperately, something about danger, something about keeping the baby safe. Renee panicked. She admitted she'd been drinking. She wasn't supposed to be out, wasn't supposed to be involved in anything official. Instead of calling for help, she made a decision, one that changed 3 lives forever. She picked up the baby and, in a moment of fear and confusion, carried him around the block to a dumpster behind an old warehouse. She told herself someone would find him. Someone who could help. She couldn't risk her job, her reputation, her future. So she walked away. And someone did find him. Ethan. When this came out, everything changed fast. The confession gave the FBI exactly what they needed to clear Ethan of all suspicion. Within 48 hours, every charge was dropped. His record was restored. And just like that, the same people who had taken him away in handcuffs were issuing public apologies and press releases. But it didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the image of Jaden standing in the yard, watching his father get arrested, or the quiet, sleepless nights Maria spent wondering what would happen to their family. Still, the truth mattered. And now it was out. When Ethan came home, the neighborhood was waiting. People stood outside their houses, on porches and sidewalks, clapping as he stepped out of the car. Neighbors brought food, hugged him, told him they always believed in him. But Ethan wasn't looking for applause. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on one person. Jaden, standing at the edge of the porch with his hands in his pockets, eyes tired but steady. They didn't need words. They just walked toward each other and embraced. And for a moment, all the noise around them faded. It was just father and son, holding on to the only thing that had never changed, their love for each other. In the weeks that followed, things began to settle, though they would never quite be the same. Ethan was offered his job back, a full reinstatement, badge and all. He turned it down. He said his purpose had already been fulfilled. The job he cared most about was raising Jaden, and he'd done that with everything he had. Maria quietly returned to her routines, cooking too much food and humming while she folded clothes, trying to find comfort in the ordinary. Jaden, meanwhile, was processing everything. He was still in touch with Jonas, who helped him navigate the aftermath, not just legally but emotionally. He knew now that his birth mother, Alicia Monroe, hadn't abandoned him. She'd tried to protect him. Her final moments were filled with fear, not neglect. And that truth, though heartbreaking, gave Jaden something he'd never had before, peace. He also learned more about Alicia's life. Public records showed she'd been trying to get out of a difficult situation. The home clinic where she gave birth had been shut down shortly after her death. Its files had been buried, its staff scattered. No one had connected the dots. No one had looked hard enough. Except Jaden. There was still more to learn, but the biggest question, the one that had shaken the foundation of his world, was finally answered. Ethan hadn't taken him. Ethan had found him, had loved him, had saved him. And in that truth, Jaden found strength. The story wasn't simple, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And now, it belonged fully to him. Jaden had always known there was more to his story. Even with all the love and honesty he'd grown up with, there were questions that lingered in the quiet moments. After everything that had unfolded, the investigation, the arrest, the search for truth, and finally the confession that set everything straight, those questions started to have real answers. With the DNA match confirmed and Alicia Monroe identified as his birth mother, new doors opened. For the first time in his life, Jaden had names and connections to a family he never knew existed. And he wanted to meet them. The trip to Alabama wasn't an easy one, emotionally or otherwise. It wasn't about leaving anything behind. It was about understanding where he came from. Jaden wasn't looking to replace anything or anyone. He just wanted to see the faces of the people who shared a piece of his story, even if that piece had been hidden for nearly 2 decades. He flew out with Maria by his side. Ethan stayed back, not because he wasn't welcome, but because he knew this was something Jaden needed to do on his own terms. The family they were going to meet, Alicia's younger sister and 2 of her children, had been shocked when they learned Jaden was alive. They'd grown up thinking the baby Alicia gave birth to had died or disappeared. His sudden reappearance brought a swirl of emotions: joy, sorrow, confusion, relief. When they met, there were no grand speeches or dramatic reactions. Just tears, hugs, and long looks that said everything words couldn't. His aunt showed him photo albums filled with pictures of Alicia, laughing with friends, holding her niece, standing in front of a small church in a summer dress. Jaden stared at those photos for what felt like hours, memorizing the curves of her smile, the softness in her eyes. There was something surreal in seeing a part of himself reflected in a woman he never got to meet. They shared stories about Alicia, how she was smart and stubborn, how she loved to sing, how she had plans to leave town and start fresh before everything went wrong. Jaden soaked it all in. He asked questions, listened, laughed, and cried. They gave him a necklace that had belonged to her, something simple but meaningful. He accepted it like it was a piece of a puzzle he didn't know he was missing. But even with the warmth and welcome, Jaden knew where his heart belonged. When his cousin asked if he planned to move to Alabama now that he'd found his roots, he smiled. He explained that while learning about Alicia and meeting all of them meant the world to him, he already had a home. Not just a place, but people, Ethan and Maria, who had built a life with him, for him, through every season of joy and pain. He returned home with more than he left with. Not just a necklace or family photos, but a sense of clarity. He didn't feel torn between 2 lives. He felt whole. He had 2 beginnings, one with Alicia, who brought him into the world and loved him in her final moments, and one with Ethan and Maria, who carried him through every day after. Jaden started journaling again, something he used to do as a kid but had let go of. This time, he wrote not just for himself but for others who might be walking through questions of identity and family. He didn't claim to have all the answers, but he had a story, a powerful one about love, choice, and truth. And he was ready to share it. What came next wasn't a return to normal, but a step into something new. Life at home continued, simple and steady. Jaden studied hard, volunteered at the local hospital, and spent quiet nights with his parents watching old sci-fi movies and debating theories about time travel. The house felt the same, but something in him had changed. Not because he had found something new, but because he finally saw the full picture of what he already had. And it was enough. More than enough. The fall after everything unfolded brought a kind of calm that felt earned. The leaves turned golden in the front yard, and life slowly began to settle into a new kind of rhythm. Jaden had returned from Alabama with a deeper understanding of himself and a sense of peace he hadn't even realized he'd been searching for. The chaos of the investigation, the arrest, the long nights of digging through the past, they had taken their toll. But now, standing on the other side of it all, Jaden felt something else entirely: purpose. He started writing. At first, it was just for him, a way to work through everything he had learned and felt. But soon, those words began to take shape as something bigger. He was invited to speak at a local youth event, where he shared his story with honesty and heart. One of the organizers, moved by his message, connected him with a TEDx coordinator. A few weeks later, Jaden found himself standing on a stage under bright lights, delivering a talk that would go on to be watched by millions. He called it "Found in a Dumpster, Raised by a Cop, Freed by the Truth." It wasn't flashy. It wasn't rehearsed to perfection. It was real. He spoke about identity, what it means to know where you come from and what it means to choose who you become. He talked about forgiveness, not just the kind that clears someone else's name, but the kind that allows a person to move forward without bitterness. He spoke about what it meant to grow up black in a white household, about the love he received, the stares he got, and the questions he still carried. He didn't sugarcoat anything. But more than anything, he spoke about family, not defined by biology, but by love, loyalty, and showing up. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people across the country: adoptees, foster parents, kids navigating racial identity, families trying to heal from old wounds. Jaden answered as many as he could. He didn't claim to have it all figured out, but he had learned something important. Stories matter. And his story, no matter how unusual, had the power to help people feel seen. A few months later, a letter arrived in the mail, thin and white with a university crest stamped on the corner. Jaden stood in the kitchen with Ethan and Maria, heart pounding, as he opened it. He read the first line, blinked twice, and then held it out, grinning so wide it almost hurt. He'd been accepted to Stanford. Full scholarship. The room erupted, not with screaming, just quiet laughter, tight hugs, and the kind of tears that come when you've been holding your breath for years and finally get to exhale. In the weeks that followed, they packed for college the way the Coles did everything, together. Maria folded clothes and labeled boxes. Ethan gave way too many tips about bike locks and dorm cooking. Jaden pretended to be annoyed, but inside, he was soaking it all in. On his last night at home, they had a simple dinner: his favorite pasta, garlic bread, and a little cake that read, "We're proud of you," in crooked frosting letters. As the car pulled away from the driveway the next morning, Jaden looked back through the window. Ethan and Maria stood waving, their arms around each other. He waved back, his throat tight. He wasn't leaving behind a mystery or running toward answers anymore. He was stepping into a future that he had helped shape, built on truth, love, and the kind of resilience that can only come from walking through fire and coming out stronger. At school, he kept writing. He joined a student group focused on racial identity and social justice. He found friends who shared parts of his story, others who didn't, but listened anyway. He called home every Sunday, just like he promised. Sometimes just to say hi, sometimes to vent, sometimes to sit in silence while his dad watched the game in the background. Jaden knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be new questions, new roads to walk. But now, he faced the future with the same strength that had carried him through the past. Not defined by where he began, but by what he chose to do with the life he was given. And he had big plans. For himself, for others, for the truth. Always the truth. This story offers powerful life lessons that resonate well beyond the headlines. At its heart, it reminds us that family is not always defined by blood, but by the love, choices, and commitment we make every day. Ethan didn't just rescue a baby. He chose to raise, protect, and believe in him against all odds. It's a reminder that doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, can have life-changing ripple effects. Jaden's journey shows us the importance of searching for truth, even when it's painful, and that forgiveness and identity are both processes that take courage and grace. For older audiences who may have faced loss, unexpected turns, or questions about their own legacy, this story affirms that your past doesn't define you. What you build from it does. It's never too late to choose love, to stand by those you care for, and to create a future grounded in truth and compassion. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear from you. What kind of real-life stories or topics do you want us to explore next? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found meaning in today's video, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss more inspiring, powerful content like this. Let's keep growing together.